thank in advance our two interpreters. I work with interpreters every day. I work with interpreters every day in my court, and sometimes as many as 5 different languages, because I live in a very diverse population. They have an incredibly difficult job, and I appreciate their work so much. The other thing I like is, when I was in Tribina last week, we had headphones like this. I don't like that because it messes up my hair, right? So this I prefer. If I'm invited back next year, I would prefer one of these so that my beautiful hair is not messed up. Mr. Dženings also has a lovely hair. Won't mess that up. Well, thank you for having me today. Fakultet, is it Fakultet Zapravni? Is that right? Šta? What's up? The first year that I visited Serbia in 2022, I said stravo, and the class said, we do not say stravo, say ciao. So last year I said ciao, this year I say šta. Before we begin, something very important. We start every court hearing in the United States with a selfie. Is this okay? We'll take a selfie. Got it. Kamala, thank you. That is my entire presentation. So this is something that I think is unusual in Serbia. Let's see if I can say this correctly. Moje zamenice su on, nego, sudija. Right? My pronouns are he, him, and judge. This is not, I think, customary in Serbia to share your pronouns. But I want to be clear, it's not even customary throughout the United States. It is customary in my court. And in fact, there is a sign on every courtroom door in my courthouse that says the court respects all gender identities and expressions, and you can use your pronouns. And this week is Pride Week. In Belgrade, I visited the Pride Information Center this last Monday. But I know this is not customary in courts in Serbia, but I wanted to just give you an example of something that we do in my court that's a little different. We share our pronouns. The first thing I want you to know is I love Serbia. Now, a couple of you were with us, a couple of you, the students, were with us in Tribina last week, so you've seen this presentation before. Don't tell them how it ends, okay? There's a surprise at the end. But I do love Serbia. Last year, I ate cevapi and burek and Turkish coffee. I drove all over Serbia. I stayed overnight in the guest house at the Studenica monastery. I went to a Red Star match, Ivanka's favorite team, not Partizan, in Red Star. And we climbed to the top of Babanzuk with our students as well this year. Now this year I did something even more special. I went to the Viaga concert on Saturday with Mr. Dženings. And they were trying to interpret the lyrics for me. I said, it does not need interpretation. This is music. I understand the music. He was excellent. I think he and I are about the same age, but somehow he looks younger. Younger than me. I've been trying to learn Serbian as well, and I've been studying Serbian history. That's how much I love your country. I'm from the state of Washington in the United States. That's in the northwestern United States, not Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is around here, but I'm here, state of Washington. It's the only state in the United States that is named after a former president. I don't know what the distance is, maybe 4,000 miles? I don't know how many, maybe 9,000 kilometers, something like that.
From here?
Yeah. To Seattle? Yeah, it's a lot.
No, it's bigger than that.
Yeah, it's bigger than that?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're talking about from here?
To Seattle. It's pretty fun. And this is what my city looks like. It's a very beautiful city. But I tell people in my city that Serbia looks a lot like my state of Washington, because there are a lot of mountains, there are a lot of trees, and there are a lot of rivers. This is my courthouse, and I'm on my courtroom is right here, so about near the top floor. And this is what my courtroom looks like. It's a very basic comparison of the courts. I want to be near the microphone because I know this is being recorded. But I'm in the Superior Court. So you know, in the United States we have 50 states. Each state has its own set of courts. And I'm in the Superior Court, which is sort of more or less equivalent to the higher courts in Serbia. And then, as in Serbia, we have a Court of Appeals, and we have a Supreme Court. And earlier this year, I served temporarily on our Supreme Court, not the United States Supreme Court, but the state Supreme Court. Now, I want to, and I don't think I brought this, or maybe I did. Actually, I did. This is a newspaper article from 1968. Now, you must be thinking, why are you showing me a newspaper article from 1968? I actually have the entire article right here. And this is about juvenile court. You know what juvenile court is, right? These are young people who have been charged with crimes. And this newspaper article describes a young woman. She was 17 and she had run away from home. And so she had been arrested for running away, and she was pregnant as well. And the father was not around. Now this is me in my court. And the young woman, the 17-year-old in that article, is there in my courtroom. This was in 2017. And the reason I'm showing you this, and our two students who were with us in Starokolina last week already know this, is that woman who had run away from home and had been arrested and who joined me in court was my mother. And she was charged with crimes in the very court where I now serve as a judge. And I was born a little while after she was arrested. She actually passed away this last May. But I love telling this story because she lived a remarkable life. Now this is what a criminal record looks like in the United States. And it references a man who was convicted in my court, where I now serve as a judge, of a serious crime, what we would call felony. Why am I showing you this? Because the man in that article was my father. So if you're keeping track so far, my mother and my father have both been convicted of crimes in the court where I now serve as a judge. This is my father and I in 2021. I didn't know who my father was. I identified him through a DNA test in 2021. This photo was taken 5 minutes after we met. We did not know each other. And one of the first things I learned about him is he was convicted of a crime in my court. And he sold drugs for many years, and when he found out that he had a son, and he found out that his son was a judge, and also that his son was a former police officer, he said, "Son, I don't want you to worry. I stopped selling drugs 4 years ago." I said, "Thank you, Father, I appreciate that." So he stopped selling drugs just in time to become my father. And I should add that my mother is descended from people in Bulgaria. So last year when I visited Serbia, I drove to Bulgaria and visited the town where my great-grandfather is from. My father is descended from people from Russia. So I feel, and I know it's not all the same, in fact, the countries in this region often disagree, so I don't want to assume that everybody thinks the same. But I feel a connection to this region, and I feel a connection to Serbia. Now this is also a criminal record from my court. It references a young man named David, and you're probably already guessing where this is going. This young man was convicted in juvenile court, in my court, and that young man is me. And by then I had been arrested multiple times. I was expelled from school 3 times, and then I never finished high school, actually. So, maybe you're thinking, this seems like an unusual path to becoming a police officer and a judge, and you would not be wrong about that. But I like to share these things because I think all of these experiences make me a better judge today. And I don't need any of you to raise your hands and share with me your personal experiences. But I'm just going to guess that some of you have not had a perfect life. Maybe something has happened to you. Maybe something has happened to a member of your family. Maybe you've done things that you're not proud of. And what I want you to know is whatever brought you to law school and whatever reason you're considering criminal justice, if you're considering working in criminal justice at all, your background, everything that has shaped you is important. And it will make you a better lawyer. If you decide to be a police officer, a better police officer, a better judge, a better prosecutor, a better defense attorney. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. This is where I grew up. I grew up in public housing in my city, paid for by the government because we had no money. Often we had no food. So you can see there's graffiti and there's a fence and there's chains and locks. This is where I grew up. Now what I want to spend a few minutes talking with you about today is whether it's a justice system or a legal system. Can anybody tell me the difference? Does anybody know what the Socratic method is? So, I don't know if they've discussed this in law schools in Serbia. In law schools in the United States, they have the Socratic method, which means if nobody volunteers, then I call on somebody and I keep asking them questions until they cry and run from the room and withdraw from law school. I'm not going to do that because I hated when professors would call on me. Do you have this expression, they call it cold calling, right? Like I did not raise my hand and then I just called on one of your professors. It's terrifying, and I would always turn red and be very embarrassed when I would be called on. One of the best reasons for being a judge is nobody gets to call on you, right? You do all of the calling. I never say in the United States that I work in a justice system. I say I work in a legal system. I say justice is our goal, but this is not a system, at least in the United States, that is always producing justice. We have many problems with our system in the United States. We have racism, we have gender discrimination, so many problems. So I never say justice system, I say legal system. Now this is me after I had finished being arrested, after I had finished dropping out of high school. I became interested in working in law enforcement, and initially I was told there was no place for you in the legal profession. There's no place for you. You will never be a police officer because you have a criminal record, because you did not finish high school. But I was very determined, and I was very fortunate. So one of my questions for you is think about what your goals are. I decided when I was 17 that I was done being arrested and committing crimes, and that I just wanted to help people, and I decided the best way to do that was to work in the law. And maybe some of you have already answered that question for yourselves. So I started off in the United States Border Patrol. This is a police agency that patrols the border in the United States, in California. Why did I start off in the Border Patrol? It was the only police agency that would hire me without a college degree. And so another question I have for you, now I guess first I'll show you. We patrol the border, we would seize drugs. Maybe some of these drugs were supposed to be for my father to sell, I'm not sure. I didn't know at the time, that just occurred to me. But another question I have for you is, where are you willing to start? And the reason I ask that question is, I took the first job that I could get. This was not my ideal job. It was not, as we would say, my dream job. It was the only job that I could get without a degree from a university. But I knew I could do better. And so I attended college, I attended university at night while I worked during the day as a Border Patrol agent, full time. And eventually I became what they call a special agent, an investigator. This is a law enforcement job you get with a college degree in the United States. And so I didn't have to wear a uniform anymore. Instead, I would break down doors and arrest people carrying miniguns, our students already saw me do this in Starpanina, but because I have a deep voice, I served on our special response team. So this is what we would do. We would break these doors down at 6 a.m. to arrest people. And they said, well, Agent Kinan, you have a deep voice, so you should bang on the door, right? And so I would say, police, open the door, search warrant. But look at me, I am not a big person, right? I'm very slender. And so a man, I banged on his door, and I think I just broke this. I apologize, please don't arrest me. So I banged on the door, and I said, open the door, and he opens the door, and he looks at me, and he says, you do not look anything like you sound. I look very different than I sound. So back then, I had muscles, I was bigger, I don't have any more muscles. But I did this for many years, but I still felt like there was more that I could give. That I still wanted to help people, and I didn't feel that I was helping people necessarily by arresting them. And so I needed to change. And so another question I have for you is, are you willing to change? I hope that you have, friends, I hope that you have long careers. But your first job might not be your only job. And your first career might not be your only career. Maybe you would start off working in private practice. And then maybe you'll be a defense attorney, or a prosecutor, or a judge. Maybe you'll do all of those things. But I want you to always ask yourselves, am I happy? Am I fulfilling my goals? Now I know it's not that easy because there aren't always the jobs available, and this is the situation in the United States as well. I have friends who work as lawyers and they are very unhappy because they can't find the job that they want. But I would encourage you not to give up. So I attended law school at night. I worked full-time during the day as an investigator, and I went to law school at night. And I finished in 3.5 years. That's my daughter at graduation. She is now 18 and starting university next week. And so another question I have for you is, are you willing to do the work and not get stuck? Because I was working full-time and going to law school. That was 100 hours a week for 3.5 years. But I knew that what I was doing in law enforcement no longer fulfilled me, and I was not going to get stuck, but it might take a lot of work. And so I went to work for a very big law firm. I was quite fortunate. But eventually I was unsatisfied doing that work as well because I was representing corporations. Not exactly, as we would say, God's work. I was not helping people, I was helping corporations, although in the United States, under the law, corporations are considered people. And so I started volunteering. I worked in civil legal aid, so providing free attorneys to people who are poor. And that work was close to my heart because my family then, and my family now, they're still quite poor. And they often need my help. Now eventually I went to work. I needed more experience and I decided I wanted to be a judge. But I thought, I can't be a good judge until I have some experience maybe working in criminal prosecution, so I left my job at the law firm and I worked temporarily as a prosecutor. And this was not a popular decision with my colleagues because they felt that it was a betrayal. Because I mostly worked around people who were being charged with crimes, not as a prosecutor. But sometimes you have to be willing to be unpopular. And I had people who told me that they felt betrayed by my work as a prosecutor. However, you should not take yourself too seriously. I volunteered to be a fashion model, I think I look pretty good. I don't know, I like this photo on the right a lot. This was in my state, because we have many different ethnic and racial groups, they each have their own bar association. So the lawyers do. There is a bar association for black lawyers, there's one for Latin American lawyers, there's one for Middle Eastern lawyers, Native American lawyers, Korean American lawyers, Filipino lawyers, and Vietnamese lawyers. And this was a fundraiser for scholarships for Vietnamese law students where the judges serve as fashion models, and so I was a fashion model. And I was because I wanted to do everything perfect, as most lawyers do. And so I practiced my walk 40 times before the show, and so I'll show you. So you walk out to the middle, right? You walk out to your point, and then you stop, but then you pivot, right? You pivot so everybody can see, right? And then you walk up, right? And then you pivot, and then you pivot, all right? You're welcome. Now, I think left my bag upstairs, I'm not sure. I have a prize, and I'll find it later. But can anybody tell me who this is? Anybody? It's a United States Supreme Court justice, but she's died.
What's the last name?
Who was it? Was it?
She died last year.
Yeah.
Or 2 years ago.
Yeah, anybody know her name?
Ruth.
You said Ruth?
Yes.
All right, what is your name?
Ruth.
No, but what is your name?
Oh, my name, sorry. Maria.
Okay, I'm going to find you later. So, I have a prize for you. It's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So very good. Now, sometimes, on the topic of not taking yourself too seriously, sometimes I would dress as Ruth Bader Ginsburg as well. Do I really look like Ruth Bader Ginsburg? Not really, right? But I would do this at legal functions. Now, why do I do that? Why would I be a fashion model? Why would I dress as Ruth Bader Ginsburg? Do you think that this is undignified for a judge? Do you think this is improper? If you do, it's okay. Because I want the community to know that I am just a person. Judges are not gods. right? We do not make our decisions like they come down from the heavens. I'm just a person. And so the reason that I do these things is I want the community to know that I am part of their community and that I care about them. So don't take yourself too seriously. Now, one of the last things that I'll say before I turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Dženings, is always ask yourself, is there more that you have to give? There's a famous quote, I'm trying to think who said it. It might have been Auden or Milne. But they said, I wake up each day torn between the desire to change the world and the desire to enjoy the world, right? And I wake up with that same desire. But I'm just always thinking about, is there more that I can do? Is there more change that I can do? I'm always trying to improve. And so in 2016, I said, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore, I want to be a judge now. Very different system in the United States because we elect judges by popular vote in the United States. We don't, most judges are not appointed, they're elected. So my population that I serve is just over 2 million people, and about 1.3 million of them are voters, so I needed to convince the majority of them to vote for me, so I ran for election. I walked in parades, I gave over 100 speeches, and eventually I won with about 75% of the vote. And that's my daughter with me on election night 2016. Now, many of my friends said, you cannot go and be a judge because that is a corrupt system. The judges sending too many people to jail, too many people to prison. You say that we don't have a justice system, you say that we have a legal system and you want to change it. You cannot go work in that system and then say you want to change it. Because if you work in that system, you're saying it's a good system. If you want to change the system, stay outside of the system. But the question that I asked myself, and what I would encourage you to think about is, can you do more if you're on the inside? So now I'm in my 8th year as a judge, and I'm always working to change things from the inside where I have more influence. Now this often makes me very unpopular with my colleagues because some of them don't want to change the system. But I am there to destroy the system that I'm working in a way. Not abolish it, but rebuild it in a way that's more effective so that I can say it is a justice system. It's not just a legal system. These are my gavels. The one on the right, my pink gavel, that's the one I keep in my courtroom. If you know about Hello Kitty, my daughter calls that the Hello Kitty gavel. So this is where I work now. These are law students visiting in my court. What do you notice about these students? Anybody? What's something you notice about them?
They're very diverse.
Very diverse, yes, thank you for noticing that. So this is a special program at my law school for students from diverse backgrounds, students from groups who have historically been discriminated against in our courts. And we think it's important for those from these diverse backgrounds to be lawyers and to be judges. Because in the United States we have so much racism in our system. This is me visiting the University of Washington. There are 2 law schools. There are 3 law schools in my state. There are 2 law schools. 2 of them are in my city. This is the University of Washington. That is the state law school. And there's a private law school called Seattle University, and that's the law school that I attended. And I will be speaking with these students in 2 weeks, and I will show them photos from Serbia, I'll show them this selfie that we took today. Now, one of the last things I'll show you, and this was very exciting for me. Earlier this year, I was temporarily made a justice of our state Supreme Court. And that's me towards the left. That was the most remarkable experience I've ever had in my legal career. And I felt, I'll be honest, I felt like crying. I thought, how did we go from my mother being arrested and charged with a crime in court, and my father being arrested and convicted, and me being arrested, to me being on the Supreme Court even temporarily? It was a surreal experience. They televised all of our Supreme Court hearings, so that's me on the right, the lower hand corner there. So the last question I'll leave you with is your background relevant? Remember when we started, I said, I don't need you to tell me, I don't need you to raise your hand, but maybe you've had things in your background that would make you a better lawyer, even though until today maybe you thought that I'm never going to tell anyone about this. So as an example, in your criminal code, here in Serbia, the CPC, when a judge decides the amount of bail, they're required to make a reasoned ruling. You see that word highlighted, reasoned. Well, can anybody raise their hand and tell me what is a reasoned ruling? We had somebody volunteer at the Summer Criminal Justice School. They tried, and I appreciated that. I mean, you're law students. Does anybody want to tell me what's a reasoned ruling? There are no wrong answers. Well, let me ask you this. If I went around this room, person by person by person, and I said, what do you consider a reasoned ruling? And each of you answered me. Do you think that everybody would give the same answer? No. Because what is a reasoned ruling to you might not be a reasoned ruling to me. And why is that? It's because we all have different experiences. We all have different backgrounds. As judges, we pretend that we all think the same and we speak for everybody, but that's not true. My background is different than your background, and your background, and your background. And that's important. We need those different experiences in the system. And so I'll just end by saying that we need you, and Serbia needs you, and the world needs you. And I hope you'll consider, even if you don't work in criminal justice or the criminal legal system, I hope that you'll consider just thinking about these questions today. Hvala, thank you for your time. Sure. Any questions?
Who was your favorite prosecutor?
No, there's a question here.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I have a comment. Thank you for sharing your remarkable life story, your remarkable experience. It was really enlightening, and I'm really happy that the students heard it and all of these very valuable messages from you. I just wanted to ask, from your point of view, since you became a judge, do you feel that you've made a difference within this legal system, brought a little bit more justice into it?
Yes, thank you for that question. So, in case you didn't hear the question, is do I feel as a judge that I brought more justice into the system? Because I call it a legal system. It's still not a justice system, but it's getting there. And not just from my work, but the work of others as well. I came with an agenda. I had specific things that I wanted to accomplish. And so each year, I do something that is somewhat unusual for a judge. I help write new laws. And I testify before our legislature, our assembly, in support of these laws, and try to make new laws. Now, some people say judges shouldn't be writing laws, but I'm working for change, and I've changed some of our court rules. I've changed some of our procedures. I've issued decisions that I think have made the system better. And I appreciate that question because these questions that I asked you to consider, they apply to me as well. There might come a point where I say, I'm no longer effective here. This is no longer serving my goals and I need to do something else. So even I ask that question of myself, and there have been times, I'll be honest, there have been times when things have been very dire in our system and I've considered leaving and doing something else. A couple of years ago when the United States Supreme Court ruled that there is no right under the Constitution to an abortion. And I know this is a controversial topic everywhere you go, but I was very disappointed in that decision. It was called the Dobbs decision. And my daughter, who is now 18, was very disappointed in it as well. And I thought, I need to leave the court and go work as a lawyer to change this law back. But I have other friends that are better at that than me, so I let them do that work. Thank you for that question. Any other questions? Other questions? All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dženings. I think your PowerPoint's up here, Dave. Do you remember what it's called?
It was just open it and start.
Oh, is this the how I failed to get rich? Yeah, I got it.
That's it.
Yes, that's it, right?
Well, good afternoon. My name is Dejvid Dženings, and that is a tough act to follow. I don't have any stories about the rigors of male modeling or how I slipped through justice as a young child. But I do want to tell you a story. It's about when I was in college and I had recently transferred from the baseball team to the debate team. That's a story in its own right. But they took us to court to watch prosecution. And it was a juvenile prosecution. And I'll never forget sitting in court as a college student and watching this young, thin, wiry child who had been charged with a crime. And he had these quick movements, kind of like a weasel, darting back and forth. And he was extremely defiant. I looked at this kid and I thought, boy, there are some people who are just inherently bad. And it was at that moment I decided that I wanted to be a prosecutor. And this will blow you away. That defendant was Dejvid Kinan. None of that story is true. Actually, it is true that I did go and watch prosecutions and otherwise, but I never wanted to be a prosecutor. So what I want to talk about today is how, even though I never wanted to be a prosecutor, even while I was serving as a prosecutor, I became a career prosecutor. 39 years as a prosecutor. I retired last Saturday as a prosecutor. But it was nothing I had ever planned to do. So what I want to talk to you a little bit about is one of my cases. And this is a case that I felt was extremely important. And I'm going to discuss how this case came to be, how we investigated it, and how we pushed through, and how, even though it turned out very well for the United States, and we achieved justice, it didn't turn out so well for me. I also want to talk to you a little bit about your values and how I want to encourage you to trust what you love as opposed to what your friends tell you should do and otherwise. I'll give you some insight about my own career as I look back over what I have done and what I find valuable at this point. And David, you did break this. There's a crack in it. And finally, if we have time, I want to talk about the 4 things I think you all can help change here to make your system more effective. I've been a resident legal advisor here for 4 years. And I too love Serbia. In fact, I put my money where my mouth is. I bought a house in Serbia. Stari Slavka, beautiful, on the Danube. I have a wonderful Serbian girlfriend. Now, don't think that I left some wife in the United States and came over here. And I get this all the time. Like, oh yeah, an American comes over here and says, no, I was divorced before I came over here. I do have 4 sons. One is a musician, he's a lead guitarist for a band, and he has a day job. One is a psychologist, looking for the best way to get into a PhD program. The next one works for Meta, Facebook, and he works with AI. And the youngest is an applied mathematician, and he works for a company that automates factories so factories can run super efficiently. So my 2 youngest sons are likely to be responsible for the apocalypse. They sound like the guys who were responsible for the Terminator. Now machines took over, artificial intelligence, automated factories, just a coincidence. So I want to talk about Bracken and why I never got rich. So when I was your age, when I was in law school, I wanted to become a lawyer because I wanted to get rich. Now, I came from a lower middle class family. My father owned a dairy. He went to college, but he foolishly thought he'd open a business, and he started a dairy. Nobody ever made any money operating a dairy until they sell the land or something. And my mother went to college too, but we were people of moderate means. Always had old cars, always had used furniture, and somehow I picked up an ego when I was growing up. Maybe it was a teacher who spoiled me or something, but anyway, I was deluded into thinking that I could be something. So law school seemed like the ticket. I joined the debate team in college, and I wanted to go to law school. When I got into law school, did well at a good law school, went to work for a big law firm. Because that's how you got rich. You go to work in a big law firm. Dave can tell you, because when he got out of law school, he was number 1 in his class, by the way. He didn't brag about that. He was a very good law school. And I also will concede he was a very good agent. We worked on a case together back when he was just an agent, a humble agent coming to me. Well, we worked together very well. We did a case against a Korean pastor who was cheating the United States. And it was a work of art by the time we finished. But anyway, wanted to get rich. I ended up postponing it for a number of years. Let's talk about this case. I did a case in Seattle. Actually, I was working in Tacoma. And that is the same Seattle where David now practices as a judge. And there's a foundry there that makes hull components for nuclear submarines. This title here talks about this case with this woman, metallurgist, falsified and altered the test results in these hull pieces manufactured for nuclear submarines over the span of 20 years. That was my case. I want to tell you that nobody believed it could be done, nobody thought it was even possible, but there are now stories. In fact, most of the remaining stories on the internet have been published by the Chinese government, by the Canadian government, and by people who aren't necessarily very friendly to the United States, because it was embarrassing to the United States Navy that this had happened for 30 years and went undetected. This is a Virginia-class submarine. It cost about $3.4 billion to manufacture. This is a nuclear-powered submarine, which means it can submerge and stay submerged for months. It can operate at depths where it can go completely undetected. It is also a submarine that carries nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles. You can see them right here. They come out of what are called valves on these submarines. It's part of this triad of nuclear, we call it deterrence in the United States, but we all know what it is. Nuclear deterrence, missiles, airplanes, and submarines. It's very important. It's not only important because it carries seamen, but it's also important because it carries these nuclear missiles. If one of these things at depth crushes or collapses, the proper word is implodes, it is a very, very significant problem. Now, historically, the United States has had problems with submarines. And if you think about it, they are going down underneath the water. There are tremendous pressures, and these pressures will actually collapse and crush the submarine. In 1963, the United States lost a submarine called the Thresher. Everyone on board died. 1968, they lost another submarine. Everyone on board died. In response to this, and I remember as a kid, Dave was just being born, I remember the second event and how this submarine had disappeared, and there was talk about whether there was an H-bomb, hydrogen bomb on board, and it scared the hell out of me as a kid. In response to this, the United States government said, look, we can't have these structural failures, so we're going to put in a submarine safety program that makes sure that everything that goes into one of these submarines is tested and meets the highest standards possible. And every step of the manufacturing process is going to be monitored and audited. So we don't have accidents resulting from inferior equipment. So this sub-safe program is born. And this is just another piece of information. The Navy lost 16 submarines to non-combat related causes. And what that means is it just disappeared. They weren't taken out by an enemy or depth charges or something else. They just failed. So serving on a submarine was very, very dangerous. Since then, when they incorporated sub-safe, everything has been great. In fact, this looks like a catastrophe. This is the USS San Francisco. And it, in 2005, hit an underground, or rather underwater mountain. And this happened at the front of it. It was going at full speed, hit a mountain, and of course the mountain won in that contest. And this is what it looked like. It actually was able to, under its own propulsion, make it back. And that's in part because of the structural integrity from the sub-safe program. So when they incorporated these things, they started to work. And it's not a once-in-a-lifetime circumstance. In 2021, when I first started to think about doing a presentation about this case, after we had just taken that Elaine Thomas plea, it happened again. A submarine hit an unknown object, and that's Navy code for undersea mountain. And the sub survived. This is the Bradford Foundry. This foundry was about 2.5, well, let's say 4 kilometers from where I worked in Tacoma. I used to drive by it all the time, and I even rid my bicycle by it. I just never noticed it. It covered an entire city block. and couldn't even tell and knew nothing about it until they had an investigation about it. But it was and remains the #1 producer of high-yield steel. High-yield steel is a super tough steel that's used in ships and in submarines. The #1 producer in the world. It became over the years so good at producing this steel that it put other companies out of business. And you're about to find out how it put these other companies out of business. This is Elaine Thomas. Elaine Thomas was the chief metallurgist at Bradkin. In 2017, she was getting ready to retire. What's remarkable about this is that it's Elaine Thomas, not David Thomas. She was a pioneer in metallurgy and material science. She was the only woman in her college at Washington State University who studied this topic. And she became the world's foremost expert on high-yield steel. They used to call her the goddess of high-yield steel. She would go and speak in front of large groups of metallurgists to talk about how she would bake, because there is a baking process involved in this high-yield steel. And everyone thought highly of her, and her plans were that when she retired, she would go to work as a consultant to help other companies measure up to her standards. All right, got to take a little bit of a diversion here and talk about testing. Well, the SubSafe program required testing of these hull pieces. So the whole process, in sum, they would cast these hull pieces out of an alloy of steels and nickel and other things. A little bit like baking. That was their mixture. That was the batter. And then they would put these things into molds, and they would heat treat them for as long as a month to get the desired molecular structure so that these things were the strongest metals, period, on Earth. High-yield steel. And to test them, they do two kinds of testing. Sharpie testing. And Sharpie testing is a type of test where they have a pendulum and they put a piece of metal here and they let the pendulum go and they measure it, how much it slows down as it breaks through this piece of metal. It determines toughness. How tough is this metal? Tensile testing determines strength. In the tensile testing, they literally take a piece of metal and they pull it apart. They measure how much strength or how much pressure it took to pull it apart. And they examine it to see what the structure looks like. Now, a question that should come to mind is, wait a minute, this is destructive testing. You cast this thing, now you're cutting it up and you're destroying it. That doesn't make any sense. Here's how they do it. If you have a large casting, let's say it's a large wedding cake. This used to be true when I was a kid. My mother didn't bake like this, but I was a typical boy, I guess. When my mom baked, if she left the cake unguarded, I was going to go and sample. And she'd yell at me, but I'm like one of the dogs in the house. It was worth it to taste the cake. Get yelled at a little. So she figured out that if she let me bake a smaller version of the cake with the same batter, I keep my fingers out of the big cake and I'd have the small cake, and I was happy, and I had once again been outsmarted by my mother. So that's what they do with this destructive testing. They take metal, pour it into separate molds. It has the same batter mixture or the same alloy mixture as the main hull, and they cut it into pieces, and they test it by destroying it, by pulling it apart, or by whacking it with this Sharpie machine. And here's a picture of the Sharpie. I told you it's a little pendulum, and they put this piece of metal that's been cut with a notch into it, and they actually take it down to 100 degrees below zero. And even though the submarine is never going to be going through water at 100 degrees below zero, because water freezes at zero, it tells the manufacturer a lot about the strength of the metal by seeing how strong it is when it's under that kind of temperature stress. This is the tensile strength. This shows this type of machine that is pulling apart these rods and measuring how strong the metal is. So they take these pieces from the little cupcakes to the side and cut them up and they test them. And what they do is they write down the scores that are given on these machines. And the way this foundry did it was that someone, usually an assistant of Elaine Thomas, would take a card and write down the score with a pen or a pencil on the card. For 30 years they did it that way. Here's an example of a card. I just made this up. I just wrote this because I don't have any of the original evidence. But if you look closely there, you see that 5. If you look here, you see underneath, it looks like there's another number there. Let me tell you what happened here. Elaine Thomas is getting ready to retire. She has a protege, another woman who had gone to Washington State University, who was about to take over for her. And this woman found this card that had what looked like another number written over an earlier number. And that didn't make any sense at all. Because if you get a failing result, and here a 37 would be failing on a Target test, you have to go through this process to rebake the metal and retest the metal. And if you did that, you just get a new card and keep track of it. Nobody erases the results. This is really suspicious. So this young woman who was ready to take over for Elaine Thomas, I don't want to call her old, she's my age, she finds this and reports this. And then the company, in an act of respectable responsibility, reported this issue to the Department of Defense, to the Department of the Navy. And we found this irregularity, and that was when an agent with whom I work came to our offices in Seattle and reported that this had happened, and that this was highly anomalous and this shouldn't happen. Nuclear submarines, nuclear missiles, big problem, serious matter. And the Seattle office listened to what this agent had to say and said, this isn't serious, we're not interested in this case. So this agent, a woman with whom I worked a couple of times, was just fantastic. And incidentally, in the United States, many of the federal agents, the agents who work for the FBI or the DEA or Customs or other federal agencies that blanket the entire United States, they're all attorneys. They're attorneys who get bored working in law firms and they go to work as investigators and find that a lot more fulfilling than working in some law firm. Anyway, this woman happened to be an attorney. She worked for the Attorney General. She came to me, she told me about this case, and it wasn't so much I thought the case at that time was provable, it was that I don't want to be the person who said no to a case involving nuclear submarines carrying nuclear missiles. I don't want to testify in front of Congress and answer questions about how much investigation did you do, Mr. Jennings? You know, did you do any follow-up? Did you ask any questions after a submarine with nuclear missiles had gone down and everyone perished? So I thought, no, not me. Now, when we opened this case, we faced opposition. This is important here because it's, now I talk to prosecutors all the time, and prosecutors are rarely supported by their management. Not only here, but also in the United States when they open up a controversial case. Want to charge a drug dealer? Well, in the United States, typically no one's going to stop you from doing it here. You want to charge a congressman, you want to charge a judge with a crime, they get involved and they want to make sure that you have crossed all your T's, dotted your I's, and done everything right. There's nothing wrong with that. But in this particular case, the Navy had these $3.4 billion submarines about to be launched, and all of a sudden my investigation was raising questions about their seaworthiness. My office had already declined this case, and they found out that I had opened it up and was investigating it. And they had questions about why we were doing this case. And there were subtle pressures. The Department of Justice, primary, was interested in the case as a civil case, but didn't think it should be a criminal case. They just wanted to collect money from the companies. And the companies were willing to pay money. The prime contractors, this is really interesting. The prime contractor, that is the entity that builds and assembles these submarines and gets the $3.4 billion. They were responsible for auditing and supervising the production of this steel. They hired a lawyer who used to work for my office to come in and tell my office that I didn't know what I was talking about, that I didn't understand anything, there was no merit to this investigation. Of course, defense counsel came in and parroted that and said, of course, we don't understand what's going on. They brought in experts. I mean, these are people with PhDs in metallurgy. They came in and talked about how there was no criminal case here. This is a one-off incident. It never happened before. All these hulls were fine. And in fact, the truth was there hadn't been a failure connected to an inferior hull casting. So I didn't have anything to go on. And of course, everyone was afraid of the embarrassment of having this exposed, because there were people, if there really was a problem here, who should have discovered it. It shouldn't have been some federal prosecutor in Tacoma who still to this day can't remember, are there two L's in metallurgy or one? You know, I always have trouble spelling it. Thank God I have spell check, which takes care of it for me. As you know, English isn't phonetic and it's tough. Now, this was very important for me in trying to resolve this case, and that was visualizing how this happened. We went out and we watched how these test pieces were machined down to fit into the test devices that you saw earlier. We walked around and looked at how close the main office was from the testing devices and everything, and reenacted in our heads what happened here. Because somebody, after making that piece, would be out of the lab, put it into the Sharpie machine or put it into the tensile testing machine and run it through, look at the results, and know, when writing it down, that it failed. And they're paying millions for these castings, and if you just tested something and it's failed, that's bad. That's really bad, because then you have to start over again. You've got to report to your bosses and other bosses. And when I went in and visualized this, I thought there's no way that the lab technician who had a failing result would look at that, write the wrong result down, write the failing result, and then erase it and write in a passing grade and bring it into a supervisor who wouldn't detect it. I mean, it just, the idea that this was happening or could have happened without some kind of discussion. As you can imagine, if I were working in the lab and I got a failing result, you could probably hear out at the main office in another building me say, "Oh shit! Failed!" Now we investigated this, and I just want to go through this. We used some obvious tools, and this is what makes the job fun. We used subpoenas, we interviewed individuals, we interviewed people at the company, we invited the companies to present to us. And this is an important topic, or it's a good tactic to use if you're investigating a corporation. If there's a corporation involved, the corporation hires lawyers. So if you're ever a prosecutor or you're ever involved in defending a corporation, the lawyers defending the corporation want the opportunity to do their job for the potential target of the company. And so if you go to those lawyers and say, "Hey, I want you to have the opportunity to fully explain this incident, what happened here. Can you tell me all about this?" Now those lawyers will put in extra hours to put together a binder or a report to explain to you everything about whatever the process was. Corporations will not come in and say, "Forget it, I'm not talking. I have the right to remain silent." Because in fact, in the United States, a corporation can't remain silent. And when they're contracting with the United States, They don't want to appear to be obstructive. So we asked them to come in and explain things, and they did. And they lied to us. I'll get to that. We did some less obvious things. Now, as a prosecutor or as an investigator, I encourage you not to specialize too soon. Because I learned a lot of important things prosecuting drug cases. For example, in a routine drug case, if you catch somebody with drugs, you tell them, you're in trouble, but it'll help you if you will make a consensual recording. And in our system, you have special investigative techniques here, but in our system, if somebody's arrested, and before they get a lawyer, you can ask them to call on the phone the person to whom they're going to maybe deliver the drugs. And tell them, hey, there's a problem here. I see some police off in the distance. What do you want me to do? And you get that other person talking. And we used to do that every time somebody was arrested. We'd have them call people and perhaps capture somebody and then do a delivery of course, no drugs. And we'd show up and we'd arrest the person who was expecting the delivery. All those techniques are things that you do in a drug case, but if you do paper cases, if you're exploring a fraud case and you're subpoenaing records, it's more like archaeology. You know, when you're at a dig site and you have one of those little brushes, and they're going through and they're looking at something and determining whether it's a relic or a rock. That's what looking through paper is like. Using these active techniques can be extremely effective. The other thing we did here was we talked to the competing companies that had long since given up on trying to make this kind of steel, about how they did testing and what happened when tests failed and how they would deal with it. And the final one was searches. Typically when you're doing a white-collar case, you don't do searches. You give them a subpoena. You politely go up and say, please, sir, if it's not too much trouble, could you put together these records that I've listed here and put them in an organized manner into a folder so that I might look at them. And they say, we'll get right on it. And they go through and they know exactly what they're providing to you. When you conduct a search, you have the opportunity to go in before the lawyers or anyone else has looked at the records, pull them out in the manner that they were stored, and discover things that may be helpful. And in this case, we did something that, you know, as I told the guys at the school, that were at the summer school, I did anything right here, it was this. Everybody was telling me I was an idiot. I'm kind of used to it. You know, we're always doing cases as prosecutors where you're brand new to the subject and everyone else is an expert. So if you don't like being called stupid or you don't understand things, you don't like people accusing you of things, you got to get over it quickly or stop doing it. Because you're always going to be asked to do something else that's perhaps complex. And if you have confidence, you'll get up to speak. And you'll be able to apply everything that you've learned before, like Dave said, to your investigation. So, we were convinced that this had happened more than once. This wasn't a one-off event. And then I found this evidence. And I had basically proven not only that I was right, but that the lawyers and the metallurgists were at best inartful in telling the truth. I say they were lying. I say they were incompetent if they were supervising this foundry for 30 years and had never found all these erasure marks. You know, I was furious with the companies. And so the boss pulled me aside and wanted to talk to me. I mean, this case, which had been one that they didn't want me to work on, was now the most important case in the office. And so I figured, boss is coming in, he's going to say, good job, I'm glad you stuck with it. Instead, I got fired. I got outsmarted. A little bit like my mom used to outsmart me. You see, I had been pushing through on this case, and there had been this noise from the levels above that they didn't like this case, they didn't want me to do it. And so they told this new boss, an appointed official, that the reason they didn't understand how important this case was, the reason that they hadn't been supporting me was because I had been secretive. And that I tended to be secretive in my investigations. And in part that was because I never had any support from the front office, so I would push ahead. So they convinced the boss that I should be taken off the case. So two things happened as a result of this. One, they pulled me off the case, and I don't like being fired from a case. I felt like one of these baseball managers or a soccer or a football coach was being fired because the players, aren't scoring. It's probably not coach's fault, but you take blame. I decided that I would apply to work as a diplomat in Serbia. My boss helped me get the job and get rid of it. But even more important, I believed in this case. I felt that something had to be done. That this could not be something that we could walk away from. And so they put another lawyer on the case, a younger lawyer on the case, and they miscalculated there too, because the lawyer they put on the case was at least as aggressive and determined as I was. And when I found out who they put on the case, I thought, this case will be prosecuted. Fire me and you put that person on the case, there's no way this person is going to walk away from this case. This case is going to be done.
Who was it, David?
Winston? Sorry. No, I paid Seth Wilkinson.
All right.
Anyway. So, I leave for Serbia, and once I'm here, we get a plea. So what the heck does this have to do with anything that might interest you? Well, I realized I had this odyssey, and I don't want to take you through it. I left private practice. I went to a big firm when I got out of law school to get rich, and I figured out very quickly that I couldn't get rich if I didn't know how to try cases. I had to go in and try cases. And anybody who knew how to try cases had been a prosecutor or a public defender, someone who had been given the opportunity to make mistakes, to experiment, and to learn how to do this. You couldn't become, it was very rare anyway, you couldn't become a really skilled trial lawyer by going to a big law firm and talking about it because they didn't get enough experience. It's like if you want to be good at kicking goals, you got to kick 10,000 goals from the penalty line. You kick 5, that's not good enough to be good at it. You have to have that practice. You have to develop what they call muscle memory. So I left, and I went to work for a prosecutor's office, and big mistake. Because I wanted to get rich, and I went to this prosecutor's office, and I loved it. I fell in love. I liked it. And most of all, I liked the scrap. I mean, we had cases that other prosecutors wouldn't try. And they'd bring them out and say, hey, nobody wants to try this case, but the boss thinks it should be tried, we'll do it. And I'd raise my hand and say, I'll do it. I want the experience. I'll do it. And I'd take that case out, and I'd win. And let me tell you, that felt good. And I kept doing that. I volunteered to do cases. And I liked this feeling of not just winning, but of doing things that were challenging. And I never looked at the clock. I never regretted going to work. But I did at one point decide that I got to stop doing this. I got to go back into private practice. This is a picture of me when I was, I looked like a typical California highway patrolman there with a mustache. Look, it was the 80s, you know, give me some latitude on this. This is just a picture of a couple. This is a mugshot of me and the president. Obviously, I'm taking it much better than the president did. I was first grade here, and I was thrilled that police were taking my picture. This was a school tour of the police station. So I stayed at this prosecutor's office, left for private practice. I went into private practice, and it was a wonderful firm. They gave me everything I wanted. They were promising me a huge salary, and experience, and I was miserable. I missed the significance of being a prosecutor. I missed the challenge. I missed that adrenaline rush that I would get. I missed taking cases that others wouldn't take and winning them. And I wasn't cheating or anything. I kind of, in my mind, I wasn't the smartest prosecutor. In my mind, I wasn't the most prepared. I was more like, you ever see a Rocky movie? The boxing movie? Okay, Rocky wasn't that great a boxer, but he was tough. He could take a hit. He could take a hit and hit back. And so I always pictured myself as that. You can, no matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be there and I'm going to keep pushing. Anyway, I became a prosecutor. I left private practice, became a prosecutor, and then started to move around the country as a prosecutor. And all along I figured, well, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go work for a big law firm. I keep amassing these jury trials. And somehow I couldn't leave. And I remember this question from an interview when I interviewed for a job in Seattle. I was thinking about transferring from Tampa, Florida to Seattle. And the appointed U.S. attorney asked me, why do you like to try cases nobody else does? And I remember telling her, I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with me. I don't know. But I think I found the answer. I think counting coup among the Plains Indians of the United States was this phenomenon where warriors would win prestige by making these risky, almost stupid moves against the enemy in the battle. Instead of going up and killing an enemy, they'd go up and they'd touch him with a stick. And as if to embarrass them, saying, I got so close to you, I could touch you with a stick. And I got away. Now, the Native Americans had some of their own issues about war and otherwise. But this whole concept of being rewarded somehow, of finding value in this risk. The woman ended up going to prison, and the Navy had to revise all of its maintenance schedules and all of its nuclear submarines that had passed through some of this boundary. I look on that, and I can go in, and the internet is a wonderful memory source. I can go in, and just searching my name, I can find all these cases that I did. And every one of those cases brings back the memory of the challenge of bringing those cases. Because as a prosecutor, there are two paths at least. One is to do the cases that your boss gives you, and we're required to do that. But the other is to use your skills to do justice. And I had the privilege of doing that for all this time. And when I look back, I see cases that never would have been done if I hadn't done them. So I look back and I'm thrilled. Now, I'm going to close. I mean, just the case was interesting. That they lied to us. The problem was in front of their noses for decades, and I felt that, what do you think's happened? We have technology. We've had that technology for hundreds of years to record verbatim everything that happened. It's the only way to have a trial. Third, trials should be consecutive. I mean, justice delayed is justice denied. If you start a trial on Monday, it should continue on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It shouldn't start in May for half a day, reconvene in August, and then once again the following year in January. That is no way to conduct a trial. And the rest of the world conducts trials in a consecutive manner. The judges here in Serbia do the same thing. And finally, all this pressure on the prosecutors here to file provable cases, all it would take is for leadership in Serbia to support the prosecutors who are willing to do those important cases. And there are prosecutors here, I've worked with them, they've become my friends. And those prosecutors have the will and the ability and the passion. Don't think that, Americans are only crazy ones here and want to count coup and trying these difficult cases. I have been to your soccer or football games. I've seen the madness there. I've been to a basketball game. There are pyrotechnics and there are riot police everywhere. The Serbs have as much passion as anybody on earth. And when it comes to a challenge or a fight, bet on the Serbs. And if they had the support from leadership to encourage the line prosecutors to prosecute these important cases that are provable against public officials or individuals in criminal activity connected to public officials, they would do it. It's not the fault of the people in the ranks, it's the fault of the chiefs. And they should encourage their people to do these cases. Be careful with that encouragement, but then there would be no longer any complaints about Serbia not proving these cases of corruption here. There would be an immediate change of direction. So that's it. If you have any questions for me, I promise not to be animated when answering your questions. I haven't recently cross-dressed. Is that okay to say?
We don't say that.
No, drag?
We can say that.
I haven't dressed in drag.
Well, there's a celebration in Belgrade tonight.
Yeah, well, she looked at the time. I don't know when we're back, but yeah, that's another story for another time.
Any questions for Mr. Jennings?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I wonder, the case you were put off, the steel case, would you say it was legal, the way they put you off the case?
Pardon me, was it?
The way they put you off the case, the
Of
steel
course,
case.
it was perfectly
legal? And
it was perfectly legal for them to do it, and that's one of the problems. They had a reason for taking me off, and I couldn't fight it. It was perfectly legal, but they really weren't. They were more interested in putting me in my place and covering the fact that they had discouraged me from trying the case. They just made the problem seem like it was all me, and the case ended up being a success. So I wouldn't mind being fired from a dozen cases if it meant that they would get to continue to their completion.
yeah, would you say that these regulations are good enough? No, it's okay.
Well, let me- the
Would you say
regulation-
that these regulations are good enough, or that they are not good enough? So how could they put you on the case?
What should have happened here, and I don't know whether this is being investigated now, is that this boundary was being audited by the prime contractor. By that I mean they sent experts in and they looked at their procedures and how they mixed the alloys and everything, and they looked at their records. They should have found this. They should have found this, and the United States is paying the money for these inspections. Again, I don't want to make reference to any lithium mining and any concerns you might have about the safety regulations involved in lithium mining, but for God's sakes, you've got to make sure that if you have a dangerous, important process, that it is fully audited and that everyone makes sure that any problems are detected. I don't care whether it's lithium mining, building submarines, or nuclear power. It should be scrutinized. And the way this was caught, it's not the regulations that were violated. When they submitted the castings, they had to affirm everything's been tested and everything is passed. And it was simple binary. It's like the basketball, going in or not. It didn't pass. And so it was a false statement, so we charged him. Yes,
Do you
sir.
have any threats, any kind of threats from these corporations? Maybe, or
Not
any
threats against my life.
something,
I
yeah.
had them go behind me and go to the bosses and tell the bosses that I didn't understand the process, I didn't know enough math to understand the process, and so they would undercut my authority with my superiors. I've had threats in the past, but in fact we had, there's a tragic story in my office about a colleague of mine who was assassinated in a white-collar case. Not like this one, but in another one where the target or the defendant was upset and was assassinated. That case has never been charged. It's 20 years old now, 23.
23 this month.
Yeah, but that's less of a, again, I realize we're a little privileged to deal with that. People here are genuinely afraid they're going to wind up in the river if they oppose people. But we have, we had an insurrection on the day the president was to be sworn in. So with the wrong kind of encouragement, bad things can happen. Anybody else? Anybody want to see a picture of my house on Sling? It's really cool. I adopted there's this big, it's called a Bosnian Shepherd. This great big black and white dog, and there's one, I don't know how to describe it. It's this giant dog, and he looks like, you don't have to admit it, just acknowledge if you're familiar with the series of movies called the Kung Fu Pandits. Okay, Poe is the protagonist in that. Black and white, so that's this dog's name when it comes to mine. Poe. That's true. Yeah, my dog's name is, anybody here ever hear of Strasbourg Chola? Chola.
So Dave, I have pictures of Poe and Chola on my phone.
Yes.
So unless you think we're serious all the time, we mostly spend our free time taking pictures of dogs.
Yes.
Thank you, David.